5, at 2:45 in the morning near Guam, USS San Francisco hit an undersea mountain at flank speed. The crew suffered one fatality, but the sub did not sink. Because USS San Francisco, SSN 711, was subsafe. The submarine safety program was born out of a tragedy that cost the lives of 129 sailors and civilians 200 miles off the coast of New England in April of 1963. Every April, the U.S. Navy submarine community pauses to remember the souls lost aboard Thresher and what SubSafe has accomplished since. To date, not one SubSafe certified boat has been lost.
That's the way we indoctrinate folks into this, so we make sure that those people, those 129 sailors and civilians that passed away and didn't die in vain, is that we ensure that, we remind ourselves not to be complacent, not to be arrogant. And that's really what today's ceremony is all about.
At Naval Sea Systems Command Headquarters in Washington, D.C., each year's Remembrance Ceremony features a guest speaker who relates the success.
Okay, everybody, welcome to another Thoughts by Jay segment where we're talking about the USS Thresher disaster that happened 56 years ago today off the coast of Massachusetts. With me today, I have Jared from AT2 Productions and Mike, who is another submarine veteran.
Good evening, afternoon, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
So, I thought today, just with what it is, it would be best to have it pretty much just a Navy hangout, especially those that have been a part of the submarine community, whether directly like Mike and myself, or family members such as Jared, or anybody that has any experience with the SubSafe program, or understands the quality assurance side of things with the Navy as well. So, Jared, would you like to talk about your experience with submarine service?
So, for those who weren't aware, I am a third generation Navy veteran, and my father was subfleet for the entirety of his career. We actually, the last 12 and a half, almost 13 years of his career, he was stationed down in Groton, which is where the Thresher had set sail from for the training exercises she was doing after the refit, which immediately preceded the incident that occurred. Wow, 56 years ago today. That I remember first reading about it after seeing a couple memorial plaques on the base in Groton, and also at not just the sub museum there outside of I think they call that the South Gate. They may have changed it to the actual main gate where the Nautilus is parked, the first nuclear submarine. They have exhibits in there about the Thresher and also the Scorpion. And also there is the Silent Service Memorial further out in New London that is has mention of it as well, which is actually what really brought me into the historian side of my experience when it comes to not just the Navy, but the military in general, because it was something that they weren't sure about, and actually still today aren't positive about what caused the incident. However, there were a lot of things they learned from it, which I think, Mike, you have a little more intimate experience with the long-reaching effects of the incident with the Thresher.
Effects that resonate even to today, as a matter of fact. It drives how submarines are built still to this day.
Yeah, the program that we're talking about is the SubSafe program, which was developed after the Thresher. There's another submarine that the U.S. lost a month and 5 years after the Thresher, called the USS Scorpion, that was not actually retrofitted back into SubSafe like it should have been. we can talk about that next month or at another time. But it really is amazing. If you watch the whole entirety of the video that I linked in the bottom there, they actually talk about how the since the implementation of subsafe, any submarine that has been certified as being subsafe, we have not lost one yet. Which is why they can say that, because unfortunately the Scorpion was not subsafe. Mike, what type of boat were you on? Were you? I think I remember it was a boomer.
I was on the USS Andrew Jackson, SSBN 619. She was decommissioned in 89 or 91, I think. I got off of her transfer shore duty in 87.
Yeah.
Even by then, even though my boat was built before subsafe, she was actually commissioned in 63, I think. She was one of the boats that was backfitted and retrofitted and became subsafe by her first refuel overhaul in 74. The Thresher changed the way Electric Boat and Newport News Shipbuilding approached how to build submarines. Anything interfacing with the sea has a whole slew of requirements and testing and pedigree on all the materials used. It really changed the way submarines were built.
Yeah, I mean, anything that could be opened up to the sea is not just, redundantly backed up by another valve. Sometimes there's even a third or fourth further down the line just to prevent that.
It even goes down to the materials used, the fasteners, down to the nuts and the washers. All of it is tested and pedigreed before it even gets used in a subsafe system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I get into discussions with people about the cost of things with the military, and I can understand why some things cost, a few $1,000s more than your average run-of-the-mill counterpart that you can get at Home Depot, Lowe's, etc. Because having to have my life on the line with one of those types of, washers, bolts, etc.
Yeah, it's not a bolt you could just go down to Home Depot and buy. We actually tell a vendor supply a material certification for that for the lot of material that the nut and the bolt and the valve were all manufactured from, or the raw material itself.
Yep.
It adds a lot of cost.
Yeah, I'll be providing the Wikipedia page as well as a couple other websites that have talk about the Thresher incident. One of them is actually the arlingtoncemetery.net, as well as navalinstitutes.org's magazine called The Proceedings. Captain James Bryant of the United States Navy discussed last year, just in July of last year, the declassification of the Thresher data. And I'm actually going to start with that. I haven't used Hangouts in forever. All right. And I'm going to present to everybody. So here we go. So to start with, the title, obviously, but picture at the commission. Well, not the commissioning, but the launching of the Thresher, if I remember correctly. It's been, at the time of this, it's been 55 years since the Thresher sank off the east coast of Cape Cod, something like 220 miles or so. The Navy Court of Inquiry investigated the submarine's loss and concluded that the probable cause was major flooding rupturing from 2 to 5 inch piping in the engine room. However, it is shown that the evidence discussed here was probably not the underlying cause. Sustaining the assertion that the Thresher's acoustic signature, recorded on low-frequency analysis recording in grams, the paper-based time versus frequency plots are produced by the SOSUS, Sound Surveillance System, passive sonar hydrophone array Foxtrot, terminating at the Canadian Naval Station Shelburne off of Nova Scotia reveals that the Thresher very likely had already sunk below her 13,000 foot test depth limit when she reported a minor casualty. The resulting hull collapse could have been avoided with more testing and better planning. One thing about the Thresher, the biggest concern that brought about the subsafe was the fact that they were using what was it, old Baleo class submarine emergency balance tank, the emergency balance tank blow system.
Yeah, the blow valves.
And what happened was when they released the high pressure air, because the high pressure air is so cold when it's flowing through there, it actually froze seawater around the vent valves, which in turn can't allow the air to back up, or can't allow the air to pass through to the ballast tanks. So it's a little food for thought there.
Mm.
All right, let's see. It was actually commissioned on August 3rd, 61, and it featured 22% more displacement and a beam 2 feet wider than the skipjack class that it was based upon. Trying to get over the fluff here. The test depth nearly doubled from 700 to 1,300 feet, providing more protection from anti-submarine weapons and making active surface ship sonars less effective and increasing the margin of safety for depth excursions in controlled surface casualties. We have, I guess, okay,
That's the Vice Admiral.
Yeah, but the way that it reads is there's supposed to be a second person there. In sound trials, the weapons testing, and submerged exercises, the Thresher's performance was outstanding. She had not yet developed or deployed overseas to face Soviet submarines. After an explosive shock test, she entered Portsmouth at Kittery, Maine on July 16th, 1962 for a 9-month shakedown. All right. On April 9th, Thresher of 63, Thresher departed for post-PSA sea trials with the rescue vessel Skylark ASR 20. And then conducted the actual deep dive test the next morning. I was trying to actually find the audio recordings just to kind of give the real feel of what happened, but I haven't been able to find it. I had it at one point and never downloaded it. I'm really kicking myself for that.
You can actually hear the bulkheads collapsing. Yeah.
So, all right. So the let's see, Lieutenant Bruce Rule from SOSIS says he analyzed the low fargrams and testified at the court of inquiry. Given that, so here's kind of the breakdown of the inquiry's reports. The Thresher ran main coolant pumps in fast speed until a stop at 0911. If power from the steam-driven ship's service turbine generators failed, slow-speed MCPs could run using power generated by the ship's service motor generators, or SSMGs. The fast speeds did not have this capability. The Threshers and MCPs gradually varied in speed up to 24 revolutions per minute, about 5 times over a 2-minute period. This resulted from the change up to 0.4 of a hertz to the 60 cycle power supply. Okay. SOSIS did not detect a blade rate, screw RPM. The Thresher did not exceed 12 knots. Rules analysis of SOSIS stations as remote as Argentina, Newfoundland, Antigua, British West Indies produced a time difference fix on the Thresher's implosion. This time difference fix resulted in a 4x8 nautical mile ellipse with major axis oriented around 040 to 220 degrees true.
Well, they heard that pretty far away.
Yeah.
As they described it is a high energy, low frequency audio event, which is going to have quite the propagation, especially at depth.
Yeah, I'm curious if there were any other submarines in the area that actually heard it and reported on it. You know, the sonar techs there. The naval inquiry justified its findings of major flooding by citing a then recent history of silver brazen pipe joints fixtures on 6 submarines, including the Thresher. But even though all the silver brazen joints that had been worked during the Thresher's overhaul had been ultrasonically tested, only 145 of the submarine's unworked joints had been tested. With 14% failure rate, this left 2,850 silver brazen joints untested. Now, this is the photo shows 2 collapsed conical strainers and orifice plates found in the Tenosas inlet of the PSA. Basically, this is part of what.
Subsequent testing they did.
Yeah, can't remember what it was specifically, what it was attached to on this ship.
This was if I remember correctly, this was from the air supplies to the emergency blow valves.
Yeah.
Airbags.
So,
The water freezing on that screen and the
Yeah.
pressure differential is what collapsed it.
Yeah.
Too much moisture in the air.
You enjoyed that way too much, didn't you?
I had to.
All right. Major flooding creates streams of high velocity seawater striking the pressure hull and internal structures. Let's scroll through this because basically what they're saying in their initial inquiry reports was that a reactor scrammed and the flooding is what caused it, in conjunction with the frozen main ballast tank's air supply. And then let's see here. All right, so it looks, of course, Rickover would want to do something like that, wouldn't he? 2 commanders, not members of the Naval Court of Inquiry and likely acting as agents for naval reactors, tried to intimidate Rule during his classified testimony before the court into saying that the MCPs were in slow speed, not fast speed. So, how can you not like a vice admiral with that name? So, in 1987, in an interview with Fred Korth, Secretary of the Navy, when the Thresher was lost, and his executive assistant Vice Admiral Marmaduke Bain, both said Rickover had altered portions of the Naval Court's inquiries report and probably done so because of the wording on MCPs was left as inconclusive, thereby deflecting the blame away from the sinking from naval thereby deflecting the sinking away from naval reactors. The anatomy of a rush job, talking about here, this is what I was looking for, is the timeline here. Delves more deeply into the information presented on the March 28, 2018 proceedings. At 9:09, SOSUS detected that the SSTGs changed speed slowly by measuring the MCP frequencies, symptom of ongoing problems in the engine room, probably caused by a seawater leak. From 909.8 to 911.3, SOSUS detected a main ballast tank blow. Flying speed about 28 knots would have surfaced the Thresher in under 2 minutes, but a speed stayed below 12 knots. Rickover reported to Congress on the sub's inadequate main ballast blow capacity. By design, new submarine classes rely on nuclear propulsion to surface in case of emergency rather than on the MBT blow system. On the Thresher, the MBTs were made smaller to increase speed, which reduced the reserve buoyancy and the effectiveness of the MBT blow. The crews became complacent about being negatively buoyant. Rickover had rowed the Thresher during the first deep dive after new construction and was concerned with flooding recovery at depth. He demanded that the submarine stop at every 100 feet to check for leaks, cycle valves, and test critical equipment. Lieutenant Commander Harvey, commanding officer of Thresher, just for 3 months, approved the PNSY Sea Trials agenda for a 2-hour deep dive. Not enough time for tests, and with brief stops at 400, 650, 1000, and 1300 to check for leaks. All right. At 9:10, the Skylark acknowledged that the Thresher's course changed to match Skylark's course. Standard procedure to minimize the chance of collision as the unexpected result of an MBT below surface. After the Thresher lost, the Naval Courts of Inquiry directed a pier-side test of the main ballast tank blow system on the Tenosa SSN 606, a Thresher-class submarine in the final stages of construction. Lieutenant Pat, the Tenseries Auxiliary Division Officer and Damage Control Assistant, directed this test. Finding of fact inaccurately describes the results. The strainers in the reducers of the Tenosa were blocked and ruptured by the formation of ice in about 30 seconds. And that's just at the surface. Wow.
Yep.
So the company manufactured the reducers. Reported that the conical strainers and orifice plates were installed upstream of the reducers and that the strainers were collapsed, not ruptured as shown in the photo that he took. 9/11, the SOSUS detected that MCPs stopped, causing a reactor scram. Alternating current power was lost. As the Gertrude was still working, the reactor operator shut down main steam stop valves, MS1 and MS2, per scram procedure, which secured steam supply to the main engines and SSTGs. You guys want to say anything, by all means, pipe in. That's fine.
So a lot of this really is going through. Plus, while listening to this, I'm trying to see if the recordings are still out there, and I'm finding a number of accounts, but not the actual audio recording itself.
I want to search the org. I think.
Yeah. So, all right. MCPs were not started in slow speed to remove decay heat from the reactor core, a procedural violation. With the MS1 and 2 shut and no running MCPs to transfer decay and residual heat from the reactor to generate steam, the main engines were useless, and keeping them open after a reactor scram for emergency propulsion is a well-known procedure, but had not yet been approved by naval reactors. So, all right. Naval Court of Inquiry Board member Captain James Osborne had served as the first CO of the George Washington. His standing order approved by Rickover were to allow MS1 and MS2 to stay open to answer ordered propulsion bell if reactor scram while below 500 feet when experienced a 20-degree down angle or during the maneuvering watch. At 9:13, the court derived this underwater telephone report using testimony from 4 witnesses, experiencing minor difficulties, end quote. Quote, have positive up angle. Am attempting to blow. We'll keep you informed. By 9:13, Thresher had exceeded test depth, maybe by as much as 600 feet. If the 0917 report of 900 north is interpreted as 900 feet below test depth or 2,200 feet, reasonable given that the submarine was reporting depth relative to test depth. There's no running NCPs, the reactor scrammed, main propulsion was lost, and the boat was accelerating downward in an uncontrollable descent that the main ballast tanks below could stop.
Does this say what crush depth was on that hull?
I think it does at the at the bottom here when I
Uh,
because when they report that the they're saying that the calculated crash depth was
so
1,900 feet.
they were beyond that.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, this right here is a sound that we never want to hear.
No.
The crew could hear the creaking and groaning sounds of the pressure hull as it was compressing. It's
Yeah, that's never a good sign. At least not on a double hull nuclear boat.
yeah. One possible explanation is the oh, go ahead.
It wasn't a double hull. It was a single A580 hull. Of course, with ballast tanks and structures around that. But it was. Our boats have always been single hull ships. I think the Russians have more tried the double hull thing.
Yeah, especially when they were using the titanium hulls.
Yeah. I built a couple of them because it was expensive. What this was multiple points of failure.
Oh yeah, this wasn't just one thing.
Yeah. I mean, you lost the ability to blow to the surface to get all the water out of the ballast tanks. You lost the ability to drive yourself to the surface when you lost propulsion. And if you're at an angle fore aft, you're just going to start sliding down. And that's what happened.
Yeah. That's one of the first things they teach you in BESS when you're doing the dive and drive trainer.
Mm.
Is that you'll be doing an up angle and they cut off propulsion and flooding in the engine room, just like the Thresher. And
That's the other thing too. One end of the boat gets really heavy. I never had to do diving trainers, though. I was a noob. So.
Well, we can't all be perfect. All right. So, one of the possible explanations for the quote experiencing minor difficulties end quote in the 0913 report was from a delayed transmission describing an earlier event considered minor at the time, such as controlled surface failure. What they mean by controlled surface failure is the planes not responding to controls by the helmsman and planesman. Sometimes they'll get stuck up, sometimes they get stuck down, which causes the various up or down angles that can be experienced. And then they do have backups, but it's not difficult, but it's timely to get them set up properly with the various manual levers to control up and down or left and right for the rudder. All right. So 0913.5 to 0914, SOSUS and Skylark detected a 30-second main ballast tank blow. This was probably the restart of the blow previous. At the 916, the Thresher made a garbled report, believed to include the words test depth, possibly preceded by the word exceeding. At 0917, Thresher sent the garbled report interpreted as 900 north. And at 918.4, SOSUS and Skylark detected the hull collapsed at a calculated depth of 2,400 feet, 450 feet below the crush depth of 1,950 feet, or 150% of test depth, creating a bubble pulse with the energy released to the equivalent of 22,500 pounds of TNT. The hull collapsed within 47 milliseconds, or 1/20th of a second, too fast to be cognitively recognized by those on board.
And thank God for that.
Yeah. It's just one of those things that I don't know if it's amongst all submariners or not. It's just every so often, I'll have a dream where I'm literally going through my old boat, and it's, you know, been lost at sea, you know, and full of water from the pressure hull collapsing and everything. You have just a weird, a morbid thought, you know, but you know, the shining side of all of this though is the creation of the SubSafe program, which helps which helps which helps maintain the construction of submarines so we don't have another disaster like this. It's not to say that another disaster like this can't happen. It's just we've been lucky, knock on wood, that we are so strict and diligent in our testing of subsafe components and the whole system itself. You know,
Yeah, and for comparison, when you look at programs like SubSafe, and even my direct experience on the aviation side, the NAMP, the Naval Aviation Maintenance Program, they do not hide the fact that these things were quite literally written in blood. But for comparison's sake, what some people need to realize is it took one incident like this to lose the entirety of ship and crew for the sub fleet to get something in place. The Naval Aviation Maintenance Program, because when you lose an aircraft, you were only losing anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 personnel in a shot. It took longer and many more incidents to occur on the aviation side before we got to where we are now.
yeah. Where was it? One of these pages listed as a source. The the book. What book am I thinking? Blind Man's Bluff. That's what I'm trying to think of. I think it's the next one here.
But so apparently we're giving Jimbo Joe the makings of nightmares for another night.
Oh, I can definitely do that.
Look at that picture.
Yeah. A mosaic of the sail and other debris of the sunken Thresher. This a part of the sail with the hull number still there. Top part of the rudder.
Fairwater plane still attached.
Yeah. This is just a list of the entire crew. I'll post all of these down in the link or the description later. But this is the civilians as well, or the non-crew company. Somewhere, anyways, they were talking about the book. They talked about the book Blind Man's Bluff as a reference in one of the pages that I was looking up. And I don't know if you've read that book, but it is good insight into the Cold War submarine service, which obviously Mike has some personal experience with that.
It used to come out of the Irish Sea because I was out of Holyloch, Scotland, and there would be a Russian fishing boat, if you could see my air quotes here, antennas on the top of it than the Pentagon. Would always follow us out every single time. It was always that game of Blind Man's Bluff and Cat and Mouse.
Yeah.
There would always be a fast attack out there to clear our baffles and make a lot of noise, and so we can just slither off into the sea. There's a lot of stories too. We get to see a presentation every couple of years at Electric Boat where I work on the Thresher, especially when we get a lot of new people come in, because we want everybody to understand how important the subsafe program is and the real cost that got us to that point. was talking about. And we get to see quite a few other things, like about 2 weeks after the ship went down, all of a sudden now there is a line of tow trucks that have to remove 100 cars from a parking lot because there was no one to drive them away. I mean, families just fell apart that day.
Yeah, it was one thing, being Nav ET, a quartermaster, I seaman, and IT all rolled in, or ET all rolled into one. But going out to sea and not being able to tell anybody where you're going because of the classified nature of any submarine, let alone a boomer. I can only imagine the families of the San Francisco in 2005 when it was originally reported about it hitting an underwater seamountain. Which how many different families were concerned about loved ones, because they don't know which submarine it would be,
That wasn't the first boat to do that either.
Oh no, and it definitely won't be the last, but it's the most recent one.
But yeah, again, it was one of those where when that was reported, it was just a U.S. submarine struck an undersea mountain. And when it's something blanket like that, the entirety of the community and their families back home, for lack of a better term, the butthole puckers, like, which boat? Who's directly affected? And then slowly, as more information is available, some people relax, but you never quite lose that initial feeling when you hear something like that of, whoa, wait, what happened?
Yeah, this is kind of like the 6 degrees of separation situation here, but I happen to know one of the guys that used to that was a shipmate of the guy who died on the San Francisco. The guy that died on the San Francisco transferred there not too long before, I guess, my understanding. I don't know the full story, but also to find out that the squadron assistant navigator was my old assistant navigator. I mean, it's just, and I didn't even hear in 2005. I was still pretty disgruntled with the Navy not letting me go where I wanted to go. So I didn't even pay attention to this on the news, and nobody in my family or friends circle ever talked to me about it. I didn't find out about it until 2010, and since then, it's just been one of those things. It's like I go back and revisit various incidences throughout history. I mean, in August 2000, I reported to the USS Michigan the same week that the Russians lost Kursk. So it's just, tragedies, regardless of what country they're from, affects this community pretty hard.
I posted in the chat a link to an article that shows a picture of the bow of the San Francisco after she hit.
Oh yeah, we've shared these quite a bit on the Veterans Talk Weekly. It's
And if it wasn't for the renewed focus on safety following the Thresher, just do you think that this boat would have survived that amount of damage if it wasn't for those measures being in place?
Oh, absolutely not. This collision resonated even down the hull. They actually had to replace most of what was that from the bow back almost to the sail. And even with all of the rippling and rupturing of tanks and the sonar dome never even The sonar array itself never even wound up leaking. We were still able to keep her. She was able to get to the surface safely and not have to be concerned about, well, obviously they were concerned, but not have to, it was actually kind of an uneventful recovery as far as you guys on board were going nuts, but if you look at the steps of what it took to get the boat back to the surface, they were able to do it quickly and efficiently, and that was all due to the SubSafe program.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, a collision like this would have destroyed the boat, I'm sure.
Yeah, and one of the things, part of the SubSafe program that we haven't really touched upon, not just the physical aspect of all the connections and parts and bits of the boat, it's the training of the crew.
Yes.
And in this particular instance with the San Francisco, the diving officer watch didn't even wait for the order to come from the officer deck. He knew what had happened once he was able to come to, so to speak, and immediately started calling for the emergency surface.
Immediate actions to the casualty.
Exactly. It people talk about the training of the various branches of service for any branch of service, and you don't realize how important that is until a situation like this happens. And I'm sure the entire fleet, when they heard about what happened and the fact that there was only one loss of life and the ship was able to return to port, I'm sure they took their safety training after that quite serious.
Yeah.
And their retraining and all that.
And this is a situation where a certain person talking about Submariners commenting on his video. This is the situation where everybody on the boat, if they needed to, could go to control and drive the ship. That's why you wear dolphins. That's how you get those.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't know anything really about nukes, but I had to be able to sure as hell help you guys back there and follow orders if need be.
Exactly.
And people don't realize that the badge of honor that is, I give Jared crap about it all the time, is the Dolphins came first over his surface and air warfare pins, but we do treat them as a real badge of honor, a real thing when you earn them, because what I have to know is how to handle yourself on the ship in any casualty. And if the order comes to seal off the missile compartment and we're going to pressurize the hell out of it to stop flooding, if I'm in there, I want you, and they say shut the hatch now.
Wait for me.
Don't wait for me. Just go. It'll be painful death, but I would rather save the rest of you. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it just every April 10th and was that May? They don't officially know the exact day, but like May 18th, May 20th, something like that of 1968. I pause for a moment each day and just think about the Thresher, think about the Scorpion, and I even now to this day think about the Kursk. And at least with the Thresher, when they went down, it was, you couldn't even cognitively recognize that you died. It was quicker than a snap of my finger.
Video of the collapsing train tanker under a vacuum. It happened almost that fast.
Yeah, but with the Kursk, there are guys in the engineering compartments that just slowly suffocated to death. And I understand, still technically enemies between us and the Russians. We could have, other nations even could have came in and helped save the crew of the Kursk, and
oh yeah, if your ship was there, you don't really worry about whose vessel is in distress.
Oh yeah. Hey Dave, do you want to join in, Dave? Give your perspective on it. Dave is the host of, or the guy who runs the Podcast 99 internet radio network and stuff. kind of got me into podcasting, and is a unfortunately he's a missile tech, you know.
Pop up.
Yeah. Anyways, he's unfortunately a missile tech. I'm waiting.
Weapons guy.
He's actually an FTB, but I just call him a missile tech because that's what they are now. So,
Yeah,
but-
they did merge them. That's you know, that's like a number of the older salts that I worked with trying to say, I'm not an AT, I'm an AQ, I'm an AX. And it's like, what's that on your sleeve?
it was the same thing in the Nav ET community. You know, I'm not an ET, I'm a QM, or I'm an IC man. It's like, what's that on your left arm there? Shut up.
I guess things were a lot different than they were back in the 1980s anyway.
So
I know they merged a lot of rates.
My sleeve has a rangefinder.
it wouldn't now. But yeah, I like I said, this is really just about you know, I wanted to talk about the Thresher and everything about it, and I think bringing light to it even now is still an honorable thing for the people that lost their family members on that boat. You know, I remember when the San Juan went down, Dave and I both put out our own feelings about that. You know, when I see the what was it, the meme where it's the why does Argentina have submarines? It's to go see the rest of their fleet. You know, referring to the Falkland War, obviously.
Yeah,
But now it takes on a little more personal meaning to me. So, Jerry, what are your thoughts on the whole? Just trying to not memorialize it and making it popular, but you know.
Well, it's definitely one of those. There's definitely multiple facets to it because there's the grief for the human loss that was due to an accident during a training evolution. So it really was even looking back on it, it was a preventable for
should have been preventable.
It was a preventable thing. However, the facet off of that is it has since prevented an immeasurable amount of loss since, because there were other boats in similar shape that were at risk of having the same incident happen. So even though it happened to this boat and affected this crew and these families, the loss that they experienced was not taken lightly. It still felt both from the grief, which will never go away from anyone who has any semblance of compassion for people who not even just fellow service members, but humanity in general. These were people who were testing a system, following construction, repair, and refit, and there was a catastrophic failure that led to the loss of life of 129 people and all of those families. That will never be completely healed. There's always going to be that scar. But at the same time, the healing process from that led to a program which has since saved and prevented an innumerable amount of loss since. So there is that silver lining to the loss there. And it does go to show how much better we can still get when we look at problems going on in the military, out of the military or not. We can still use something like this as a way to recognize that just because an incident hasn't happened doesn't mean we can relax on our standards.
Mm-hmm. I liken it to, you know, the Apollo missions after Apollo 1, you know. the fact that they had an issue, they were able to solve the problem and move forward, so they didn't lose lives on, you know, future missions under the Apollo program. You know, that is, you know, why people remember Apollo 1 is not so much the loss of life, but, you know, the fact that NASA was able to learn from it, you know.
The lasting impact beyond the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of innovation and a lot of change in the way the military does things is as a result of tragedies such as this. I mean, the submarine deep submergence system scope of certification that relates to how divers get afloat in submarines. Most of that system, most of that program came about due to loss of life. It is sometimes those tragedies are hard, make it hard for the military because it takes sometimes those tragedies for them to change the way they do business.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you know, like I said, you know, I don't like dwelling on the negative side of it.
Mhm.
I just like to bring the story's attention out because, again, you know, while at the time this was big news, you know, in not just the military community, the Navy, it was being put out by the mainstream media at the time. So,
It was national news.
I mean, it's one of those things that it's I don't think it's that we've necessarily forgot. I just don't think it's a story that's on the front of mind since things like, you know, Vietnam War, the both Gulf Wars, etc., have come across. People are further removed from it, so they don't think about it. You know.
Well, in the construction community, we do every year remember the Thresher, and we also remember the Scorpion, and we make sure that all the new young engineers and designers that come in understand why we do what we do. It's part and parcel to the way we do business.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we need to remember, not necessarily dwell on, but understand why we do things the way we do them.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why I point to, you know, various sources like the one that I found declassifying the Thresher data, as well as Blind Man's Bluff. There are other books about it. I mean, the declassified story page actually references the Sosa analyst books that he wrote. He wrote a couple of them. I encourage you guys to go take a look in the that are watching this. Go take a look at the various books and how yes, at the time, you know, in the height of the Cold War, they were trying to keep as much hush hush as possible, but at the same time, there are different viewpoints from every side of it. I mean, there's documentaries where John P. Craven, kind of one of the heads of the submarine fleet, he would try to keep people collected, but at the same time, he was working his magic to try and provide the disinformation where he could. You know, I mean, it's just the stories about the stories about this time frame, the stories about the submarine service in general, they're really great. So,
Well, yeah, I can even tell you, even in the late 80s and early 90s, when my dad was out on patrol, the limit of our ability to communicate with them were a couple sheets of paper with individual blocks that we as a family were able to add little things to it. And
Family
that
grams.
was it. Yeah.
yep. Good old family grams. Now they get sailor email, which is not much. Well, at least when I was in, wasn't much better than a family gram. So we didn't get all the cool stuff those carriers got.
No, no. The surface side, we have easier contact to the communication string. So but it just goes to show that even in modern technological times where something as simple as a phone call that a surface combatant could do, the subforce, not even a fucking chance.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're supposed to be hiding, so.
Yeah,
Oh
exactly.
yeah, no, and I get that. That's the whole point of the silent service. I mean, is we are there to be a hole in the water, so to speak. Especially on a boomer, we don't want to, we didn't want to do our mission, but we needed to be there to, on the off chance. And it, it's not that I do this to talk about it to bring glory to me or the submarine community as a whole. It's just, I think it is one of those things that, because of the way the submarine community is by nature, we don't talk about too much, and I think it's just time to share some of the stories. You know, maybe I'll do a reading of Blind Man's Bluff or something. That might be fun, actually.
It sounds like it would be.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it there today. And I'm like I said, I'm still debating on doing the Scorpion. Maybe I'll save that for the Veterans Talk Weekly that week or something. Or again, I might do something like this. Just preferably not on Hangouts. Maybe by then I'll get my OBS working.
Well, wait. So that is. What was the time frame that they?
The 18th or the 22nd, I think it was, off
Okay.
the top of my head.
Well, taking a look, VTW that week would be on the 17th, so we can do either or both. We can talk about that off air. We also have other production schedules to line up and get shaken out. Actually, tomorrow we have that meeting.
Yeah, we do. All right, let's see here. I'm just double checking the. They have it as lost on the 22nd, but yeah, still the 18th would work fine. So,
Okay.
or then the 17th, whatever. We'll discuss that.
Yep.
All right. You guys have a great time. Enjoy the weekend and check out AT2 Productions on Friday for the next Veterans Talk Weekly. And make sure to check out I forgot what it's called already.
Oh, the Saturday show, Canar with Damar.
Yes. All right, guys. You have a great week. Enjoy everything.